systems, which is a kind of like strategic framework, including Scottish approach to service design. And then we will look more concrete on how this approach was implemented or has been implemented in one of our health and social care partnership, Midlothian. And in particular, we will be looking at how this approach has improved the experience of people with frailty. So we'll have these two presentations, and then we will have a short break for 10 minutes. And then, as I said, we will have basically the rest of the meeting just for a discussion for your questions. Also, like obviously, I will emphasize that in the discussion as well, but I would obviously like to invite you to keep your questions as we go. You can also use the chat, but please know that we will be taking all your questions verbally to allow proper translations and proper discussion. So keep your questions, and we will then take them in the afternoon, in the second part of the session. Okay, so without further ado, we'll go to the first presentation from Alexandra, who will give you the introduction to the Pathfinder program. So Alexandra, over to you.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good, okay. And hopefully in just a second. And now you should see that slide, okay, perfect, brilliant. So I am going to try and keep an eye on time because I have 20 minutes to talk to you about kind of two things really. The first is I'm going to introduce you to the Scottish approach to service design and what that is. And then second, I'm going to talk about the Transforming Local Systems Pathfinder programme, which is embedding the Scottish approach to service design in it. And then once I finish speaking, really the best bit happens because Matthew's going to talk about how Midlothian, as part of the Transforming Local Systems Pathfinder programme, have got on, the exciting work that they've been doing. So I suppose just to give kind of a little introduction to me, I'm Alex Clark. I work for Healthcare Improvement Scotland and work in the iHub. So I am a part of the national team that's supporting the Transforming Local Systems Pathfinder. And I guess I bring that service design kind of expertise. I'm a service designer myself, so that is my role in the programme. But to also kind of give you a bit more background, I was for kind of the last 2 or so years involved in the Scottish approach to service design as part of Scottish Government as well. So I can kind of tell you about both bits, and that is what I'm going to do. So the Scottish approach to service design, what is it? So I would say about kind of 4 years ago, the Scottish Government started to explore kind of how we support service design approaches to be kind of to become used across public sector, across government, health and other spaces. And the Scottish approach to service design kind of came about. The way that I like to describe the Scottish approach is that it's taking service design, the profession of service design, and it's making it make sense for complex public sector, public services. And I suppose part of where that came from was in relation to, we had the Christie Commission in 2011 that talked about kind of radical reform and the need to involve people. And so what the Scottish approach to service design does is it describes design as a way of exploring the problem space openly, collaboratively, and with users, with people, before a solution or service is decided, which you may or may not kind of recognise in your own spaces, that sometimes doesn't happen. And it really is, at its heart, it's about empowering the people of Scotland to be able to actively participate in both the definition, the design and the delivery of those public services. And I think the tweet that I've put on the bottom right hand corner for me really resonates, because actually it's, if public services aren't designed backwards from the value that people need from them, what people actually want from their services and what they need to help them live their lives, then they'll have been designed forwards from the kind of aims and objectives of those in charge of those services or those systems. And what's been really, really interesting is, the Scottish approach to service design kind of asked leaders to really embrace kind of this approach and to be bold in creating the conditions for how we could do this differently, how we might design our public services in a different way. And what has been fantastic is to see, I think, kind of the interest and the desire to really do this well over the last couple of years. It's featured in our digital health and care strategy from 2018, which is why it's featuring in this programme of work, the Transforming Local Systems Pathfinder. But it's also become a really, really big part of a number of kind of services that are currently being designed across the whole sphere of kind of public services. And so in particular the social security benefits system that Scotland has been kind of that's been devolved to Scotland from the UK government, service design has been right through the centre of those 11 benefits and how they've been delivered. And so the demand is really growing, which is really exciting. But how do we build on how do we build capability, capacity, and support our organisations and our teams to do this well? And what's been really great is the Business Value of Design by McKinsey. It was a report that was released a couple of years ago that really kind of, it was a 5-year study, took over, I think it was 2 million data points and looked across 5 different sectors and 300 PLC companies. So it was private sector, but what it showed was that those people who actually embedded design in the way that their organisations, their companies worked, had a much higher, almost double kind of revenue increase than their competitors. So there's no reason why embedding design within the public sector, within health, within social care, couldn't have similar benefits. So that's a really, really interesting report, and I'll put the link in kind of later. So at the heart of the Scottish approach to service design is the Double Diamond process. And some of you may kind of know that Double Diamond. It was created by the Design Council in, I want to say, about 2007. And what it does is it's a model where it's split into four phases: discover, define, develop, and deliver. And the thing that for me is really, really important about these phases is the shape of the Double Diamond. You go big in discover, you try and uncover and understand all sorts of things about your problem space, about your landscape. You go big, and then once you have all that information, you really refine down to understand your problems, to identify the problem you should solve. And then as you go into the second diamond, you're looking at developing ideas that solve those problems and prototyping and testing them until you're able to deliver and implement them. And as part of Healthcare Improvement Scotland, one of the things that we find really interesting and we're really keen to build on is that relationship between design and quality improvement, which is why I've put the PDSA cycle in that second diamond, so your plan, do, study, act, which some of you might be familiar with. The thing that I find more often than not happening, and I found this when I've worked in private sector, public sector, with third sector, is that more often than not, people start in the middle of the Double Diamond. They come with a solution already in mind. And, sometimes it's because the pace of delivery that we need to be working to, we think we have to just have a solution ready. In health and social care, I find often that it's because we want to help. You're a doctor. Your job is to fix people. You want to help people. So you think that by helping, we're coming with a solution ready-made. And actually, we don't know if that solution is answering the right problem from a user perspective. So how do we kind of take this process and apply it to the way we work? And so this is at the heart of the Scottish approach to service design. And I think, the tweet in the right-hand corner, it really explains why this is valuable. Because for every £1 spent tackling a problem in the the design stage or thinking about it early on in that Double Diamond, it costs £10 to tackle when we're developing that solution and making it real. And it costs £100 to then rectify it once we've launched it and once we've put it out and it's being delivered with real people. So how do we support our teams to actually take the time to understand the problem, design the right and appropriate solution, and then deliver it? And that's not to say that it is linear. It's not to say that it is easy. It is quite complicated and it can be quite messy. And so I always do talk to the teams, and Matthew will probably tell you this, that we need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's okay that we don't have the answers right at the very beginning, because we have to go on that journey of understanding, especially in health and social care, and how complex it is. So it's okay to not know the answers straight away. There are 7 principles to the Scottish approach to service design. And so these really kind of formed the basis for the Transforming Local Systems Pathfinders and the teams to kind of to keep in mind as they went through the programme. But these principles, you know, I think most people would agree with a lot of what they say. The first thing, I've already talked about it, exploring, defining the problem before we design a solution. The second is around designing service journeys around people and not around how the public sector is organised. We tend to still work in our silos. We tend to think about what does my organisation deliver to that person, and we don't think about, you know, where that goes, where that person, how that person has got to us, the experience they maybe have, and, you know, actually how do we better join up so that there's less duplication, so that there's a better seamless experience. In the UK, I think people see the NHS and they think it's all connected, it all joins up, and so they want a seamless experience from their GP through to their kind of consultant in hospital. How do we support our organisations and our teams to really kind of focus on that journey from the user and not just think about what they do in their little box? And to do that, we have to involve citizens from day one. More often than not, we wait until we've come up with an idea and then we get people's feedback. That's not good enough. We have to involve them early on. They need to be involved in helping us understand the problem. They need to be involved in helping us make sense of what we've heard about the problem. They need to be involved in how we design solutions to that problem. And then as we test it to make sure that it's being rolled out well enough, involve them in that point too. And, you know, we need to be making sure that we're using inclusive and accessible research and design methods so that citizens can participate fully and meaningfully. And I talk about three things being really, really important here. It has to be legal, GDPR, we have to follow that. It has to be inclusive. So we have to make sure that we're not just working to what we call the Dolly Parton bias, for instance, which means that we just run focus groups or interviews between the hours of 9 to 5, and it has to be ethical. So, and I don't know what this experience is like for you, but I think often we kind of think, well, staff are people that we can just talk to find out about an experience, about how delivering a service is like for them. But they're humans too, and they possibly might be triggered by a conversation or a question that we ask them. How are we making sure that the questions we ask, the way that we ask them, and the support that we put in place in case anything we ask is triggering, is considered and planned for when we're involving citizens and or staff kind of members as well. I normally I don't spend too much time talking about core sets of tools and methods. I'm much more kind of open to the idea that you should know your user, you should know the questions you're wanting to ask, and you should be able to find out, okay, what is the appropriate tool that I need to use here to help me do this? If that's the quality improvement tool, use that tool. If it's a design related tool, use that tool. But there are some tools that are really useful within kind of the design space. Number 6 is around sharing and reusing user research, insights, service patterns, and components wherever possible. So what we're talking about here is how do we create consistency across services so that we're not duplicating effort and so that we don't create confusion from our users, from citizens, from patients when they go to one emergency department to another, or when they come on one local authority's website to another local authority. How do we create consistency so that they know what to expect and there's a kind of it's kind of coherent to them when they're walking through these places. And this is something that isn't finished, you know, how do we contribute to continually building the methods, the tools, and the community? It's growing in interest. We have a design community of practice that I run for health and social care. If anyone is interested in attending, you're more than welcome to. Just kind of ask me about it later and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So how does this all relate to the Transforming Local Systems Pathfinder? And if some of you have seen the presentation that we did at DigiFest, you may have a bit more of an understanding of this. But essentially, the Transforming Local Systems Pathfinder programme is adopting the Scottish approach to service design to facilitate local partnerships to design with and for citizens preventative and digitally enabled services and supports. And I guess this is, I've mentioned it before, but this is in line with the 2018 kind of digital health and care strategy, which kind of set out an ambition to embed the Scottish approach to service design to really kind of allow co-design of products and services and supports to deliver fit for purpose service models. And so we formally launched the programme in June 2019, and it was initially for a period of 2 years, with the potential that we could kind of extend the funding for a final third year. As many of you will know, a slight pandemic got in the way of our second year, so the teams will go into the third year, but the third year is really the second year, because kind of a lot of the work was slowed down or put on kind of a back burner, with members of teams needing to go off and support in other areas to kind of with the COVID response, which was to be expected. But anyway, we kind of built a programme that kind of took the Scottish approach to service design and built it around the Scottish approach to service design in an attempt to test whether the Scottish approach to service design could kind of be effective in the context of transformation of health, housing and care. We also wanted to see if we could establish a repeatable and adaptable way of supporting local partnerships with and kind of link them in with a national team of experts. Typically, I think what happens when we kind of when we have funded projects is we ask for applications in from people to kind of allow them to kind of come on the programme, and we look at the application and we say yes, no. What happens with most of those applications is that people come to us with that solution. So they come and they say, right, over the next 2 years, this is my idea and I'm going to deliver it. But have they really taken the time to do that first diamond? Have they fully understood the problem? Have they fully involved the service user? And how could we create a programme that actually brought that into the 2 years of the programme with that work? Is that going to be a good idea? So we were aware we were trying something new. This was exploratory. And so a big part of what we're also trying to kind of do from this work is share learning from the use of the Scottish approach to service design to really help inform wider transformation programmes and digital innovations. Because a lot of people are interested in taking this approach, but how do we get it from paper to practice? There are not enough service designers for everybody to have a service designer in their team, and content designer, user researcher, but we do have, in health and social care especially, really great skill sets to build up on around quality improvement, community engagement, public participation, business analysis. So how do we kind of support our teams to do that? And I think the thing that I just want to also say is, whilst this was a technology-enabled care programme, it actually wasn't fully about tech. We didn't want them to start off by coming in and thinking, this is my tech solution that I'm going to be delivering. We wanted them to come in and go, what is my landscape? Who are my people? What is the problem? And how can we solve that? And is technology a way that we can do that? Because if we don't pause before jumping to tech, then we end up with something like this tweet here as well, which was taken at the start of COVID and was one of 3 screenshots that someone took of their phone after downloading the vast array of NHS apps that are available on the App Store. And I mean, there's an app there for Matt Hancock. There's one for, oh my goodness, lithium. There's what app do I download? How do I know if it's going to solve it? Do I need 3 apps, and are they duplicating effort? How do we stop some of this happening? How do we actually get people to think before they design a solution? So here we go. These were kind of why we adopted the approach. Like I've already said, funding models typically want solutions for delivery outlined in application. How can we give them the space to explore fully before solutionizing? Engagement is often tokenistic or biased towards validation of our assumptions. How can we encourage meaningful involvement of people through user research and insight gathering early on in the process? And I think as well, especially because we've had COVID and everything has gone digital, how do we support our teams, our improvement advisors, whoever they are, who maybe aren't very digital, aren't digital savvy, or don't have a background in building digital? How do we help them to design services that need digital or that utilize digital in a way that we know that those solutions are fit for purpose? And I think, so what we kind of did in terms of our programme of work was we had, over the 2 years, we planned to deliver the 4 phases of the Double Diamond across 6-month periods. And at the start of each phase, we delivered a workshop that supported the teams to consider kind of what that phase meant in relation to their piece of work. As it stands right now, given that we did have COVID kind of arrive last March, our teams are in the middle of the Double Diamond because that's been delayed. Yeah, they're now going into ideation and developing solutions. We kind of, around that as well, I suppose we kind of played a role as national partners around being a critical friend, offering kind of constructive challenge. We brought in kind of design expertise as and when it was needed, gave them learning sessions and coaching. We kind of signposted to subject expertise, especially around technology-enabled care. And also we kind of planned for knowledge exchange and skills development as well around video editing and creating, and also things to do with user research as well. And we're also developing and sharing materials and tools as well. So our 4 pathfinders, these are our 4 pathfinders. We have Highland, Aberdeen City, East Ayrshire and Mid Lothian. And obviously you're going to hear from Matthew shortly, but I will just give you a little overview to where each of them are and kind of what they're up to. So each of them has actually adopted this approach in different ways. So Highland have partnered with the University of the Highlands and Islands to do this work. They're looking at respiratory symptoms and how they might improve that experience for people across the entire journey. They are currently working with short life working groups of mixed groups of people to and professions to really kind of determine what solutions might solve the needs that they've uncovered during their discover and define phase. And what's been really fascinating with the work that they've done is that I think typically they would have had a very health focus. And actually the work that we've kind of encouraged them to do has involved third sector, it's involved housing, it's involved kind of people living with these conditions. And they've really been able to build up a great picture of the challenges that people face, of the needs that they have, of the way they live their lives across Highlands and Islands, which is a hugely vast area and particularly complex. So it's really, really exciting. There are 3 kind of areas that they're looking to build ideas around are patient information and support, clinician knowledge and understanding, and data sharing and flow as well. So it's really, really exciting the work that they're looking at. East Ayrshire is focusing on a particular place within East Ayrshire called the Irvine Valley. It's a place with quite kind of high deprivation and a number of long-term conditions. And so long-term conditions is their focus. And what was fascinating about where East Ayrshire started from was that they kind of came in really thinking that COPD would be their focus for this programme, for this work. And what actually happened was that they uncovered that actually COPD is not the main focus or the main challenge that people face and that people want support with. It's bigger than that. And so if we hadn't have given them that time to really understand the Irvine Valley, the conditions, the long-term conditions of people living there, what the barriers to access are and things like that, they would have delivered or put in an application for a COPD app or some sort of tech that maybe isn't what people will want to use. Aberdeen, a really, really interesting project here. They identified that domestic abuse is a real kind of issue, and the links between the services there are fragmented, to say the least. And so what they did was they started off, and the way they approached this was they had a service designer who was their project manager, who did a lot of stakeholder engagement and mapping of the different services supports that are local, regional, and across the wider kind of country as well. And they mapped out and identified a number of kind of pain points and issues between these services. And whilst when COVID kind of hit, obviously the rates of domestic abuse kind of increased. So the specialist services that were going to support them to involve and engage with people who had lived experience of domestic abuse, they couldn't support that anymore because they had to focus on the people living through that at that point in time. So they didn't do any kind of user engagement. They paused that, but actually what they had uncovered and the understanding that they had of the wider system that supports people with domestic abuse enabled them to create for COVID a kind of a spreadsheet that explained what organisations, what supports, how to contact them, where this all fit together, which was really, really useful during that time. And obviously, Midlothian, you'll hear from Matthew in a moment about frailty, and this is a piece of work that kind of links to lots of different work around frailty that are happening there. And they're partnering with the Digital Health and Care Institute and Gemma, who was meant to be here today. I won't talk anymore about what Matthew's going to talk about, but the thing that I do want to kind of just finish on is a quote that I refer to quite a lot. It's a quote from Tim Brown, who is, I think, Chief Exec, this is his title, of IDEO, who are kind of a big service design agency. And I think this quote for me sums up what we're trying to achieve with this piece of work. It's about integrating the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. And so on that note, Matthew, would you like to start sharing your screen, and you can then present.
Thank you very much, Alex, for this comprehensive and overarching presentation. So as Alex said, now we will go into one of the real example of how this works in practice. And while Matthew is preparing his slide, just bear in mind to keep your questions, which we will be taking after the second presentation verbally. So just don't forget them.
Please do give me questions, because I've definitely not covered everything.
Great.
Okay, so that should be showing now. So thanks, Alex. Really helpful. I made a couple of notes while you were talking, and added a couple of slides that I don't think are going to be relevant to share beyond, but may help exemplify a couple of the points that you made. Hi everyone. My name is Matthew Curl. I am currently the digital program lead within Midlothian Health and Social Care Partnership. I am a physiotherapist to trade, spent 10 years working in NHS Lothian, and then moved out to look at telehealthcare as it was then, and have stayed working for the last 7-8 years in Midlothian Health and Social Care, and took an MSc in Global E-Health through Edinburgh University to help sort of reskill in this area. And we're very excited to be part and parcel of the Transforming Local systems work. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project from our perspective as a health and social care partnership in HSCP, what it meant to us, why we were interested in it, and then cover the slides that my colleague Gemma would have covered. Unfortunately, you're not benefiting from her as a sort of her design expertise, but hopefully we'll cover the main points. Right, so start out with a national aim for the Transforming Local Systems work. So it's a bit wordy, but basically what this is saying is that the national aim is a significant piece of work. So the 4 Pathfinder sites that there are, we're supposed to take forwards a significant piece of work, transforming our local health and care system, trying to move towards upstream. So it very much fits with the health and social care agenda within Scotland about moving towards more preventative care than crisis reactionary care at the moment. And our initial problem statement, sort of where we pitched our project, if you like, to begin with, was saying that, and this is common to lots and lots of places, you know, that our effort and data are siloed. We work in bubbles. We can't see across that very easily. Our efforts to put the system, to put the patient at the center, literally puts them at the center. We're not, you know, co-creating with them and doing it by design. We therefore miss out on this concept that I've called a partnership of all the talents, where it's hard enough to integrate health and social care, But when, as Alex mentioned, that we're challenged to think about the third sector and housing and citizen-centered data, how we start to bring all of that in, how we overcome some of the structural barriers that we have with information governance and organizational barriers, and no real means of integrating that effort, you know, in a sustained way. We might solve it once somewhere, but there's no platform or there's no structure that will allow us to say, well, we can start to repurpose this and use it again. And just going back to that point, I suppose there's an element there of we could be in a slightly sort of tech solutions world, and we were maybe to begin with, and Alex did caution us about that at the very beginning, had some ideas on how we could bring health and social care together with some products that might help us, and that was far too much in the solution space at the beginning, and we've learned to get a bit more comfortable with stepping away from that. But that was where we were at the beginning, with sort of abstracting our thinking, trying to get to what is the general issue that we're trying to deal with, not the specific. So Alex just talked to this. So how do you take on a big problem? We've taken the Scottish approach to service design. We are at that middle node just now. We've finished out our define phase, even with COVID getting in the way, and that's given us a problem now that we can start to think about. And I'll come on to explain that a bit more in a minute. So the context of what our project is about, frailty, and why, because it was described by one of our clinicians as the global warming of health and social care. One of the nice things about our project is because of the close working relationships that we have with management and clinicians, and we're quite small and co-located, many of us, we get to work with frontline staff who are dealing with these issues. So this was brought to our primary care program manager. Frailty sits as a major primary care theme or major theme for the HSCP as a population health work stream that we're working through at the moment, using the electronic frailty index to draw information directly from our GP systems and stratify our population, about 94,000 people at the moment. I sent a small paper at the beginning that will actually say what our current population is. So we can now take from standard interactions with GP a risk score for our population, and puts us at around 12,000 people that are either mild, moderate, or severely frail, according to this algorithm that works, as I said, the electronic frailty index. So it's a significant number of people that we can manage, and trying to improve that system of care seemed like a good idea, and building on our strengths. So again, just starting back at the beginning, we wanted to see our proposal at the beginning, what we were on about. We wanted to see across our system who we interact with, thinking about building shared trust. And we wanted to build those skills in that Alex talked to earlier with this design thinking, and start to bring an opportunity to think very differently, not just by throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as the phrase goes, but by also actually bringing in some new resources, really, for us to be able to look at our problem differently. And we were asked to generate a big, hairy, audacious aim, as the BHAA says here. So our big aim was to incorporate tech, which you can view as either an acronym for technology-enabled care, and therefore an approach to putting technology into pathways, or as a class of technology as an asset, a thing, if you like, and digital design thinking to help us transform in a citizen-centered way and achieve that partnership of all the talents. Our transformation goals, therefore, you remember, we have to be quite open in this first double diamond. We have to be quite abstract and a bit loose. So we were in the awkward position of having to say, well, we want greater system knowledge, we want greater system awareness, we want to overcome some barriers that we've always run up against. And one of the key things for us in terms of a definition of what digital was about creating new value, as the business intersects with technology and other approaches, but value that mattered to people. And then this partnership that I mentioned before. So this was the slide I've put in extra, and Alex has seen it before. This is very much what it felt like. You start something normally, and you normally know what you're going to do, or at least an idea. Whereas we've had to pare that away at the beginning and go right back to this uncomfortable space, or being comfortable with being uncomfortable, of well, we've got an idea of what we want to learn about, and we'll start that journey and trust the process. So fortunately, we had the Digital Health Health and Care Innovation Centre, the DHI, to help us in this. And they've been fantastic at supporting us with the design engagement work and the design development. And they've really centered their work around these 4 areas. We've got service mapping, public engagement, in-depth interviews, and engaging reflections. And these are the activities that we focused on during the first diamond. So we need to understand how our system works to begin with. We need to understand what matters to people in Midlothian, both sort of the superficial question and a more in-depth understanding of that. And then we need to bring all that together and reflect upon what it means in order to make sense and get to that middle point where we have an informed decision. So looking at the service mapping work that we did to begin with, when Gemma came on board to begin with, there were various initiatives that we had, bits of projects here and there, various reports that we'd produced, and a whole host of grey literature and other documents on frailty. And Gemma pulled all that together, and she interviewed and sat in with various team members, and tried to get an idea of what our system looked like, and created this visual. So some of these slides that I'll talk to are more just to have a quick look at and see what the asset looks like. So how do we identify frailty? You know, in this section, I've mentioned EFI, I've mentioned primary care records. You know, this is the way in which we're focusing on frailty. And then what do we do with assessment? How do we manage individual care plans? What are the care services that we're interacting with and dealing with? So she was trying to kind of help us see this bigger system that we've worked with. And we also, as I mentioned, we had feedback and other things before. So we had some citizen consultation feedback. What do people like? What are the challenges? So she helped us sort of pull that together as well, and start to identify some themes, which helped us to sort of feel comfortable that we were in the right area. We weren't hearing anything too new or seeing anything too dramatic to begin with. We were getting a good sense of where we were, and then we could go on and discover more. And this is just a screenshot or a shot of the service mapping exercise that we undertook, which was a very different experience for most of us. A lot of us, when we come around to sort of service mapping, we'll get out Post-it notes and think about, you know, processes and putting things up on a wall. And indeed, a lot of my colleagues said that's how they would have approached this, but we had a very different way. You can see there in the middle of the table a very large bit of paper. Patients at the center of that, and those little cardboard figures or wood figures are stood up there to represent people in services. And there are forms as well. So these are little avatars to help us sort of see the complexity of our system. How close those people are to that person in the middle was important too. It gave a sense of where people felt connected or not. And it ended up looking like the person was under siege. We're all there to do some good work. But once you saw the system, you know, there were 50, 60 of us in a room. Once you started to see that, you started to really understand how complex it was and how everyone's trying to do a good thing, but we're not as connected as we should be. And then Gemma used, I think this is Padlet, as a tool to bring a lot of that learning and information from the service mapping together, to theme it, and then to start to draw, you know, connections between it, so we could start to, you know, reference and gather our thinking. So I just put this up here from Gemma's slide to show you how that tool works if you're not familiar with it. And that helped us to start to come up with, you know, challenges that we were working on, challenges in society, challenges with living with frailty, and challenges in services. But it's important, as Alex said, to involve the citizens. It's not just feedback we're after. And I think that's hard to do. Culturally, we're good at asking questions about whether we're doing a good job. We're good at asking questions that we have to because of a duty of care, effectively, or a duty under public commissioning. But really getting in and asking people, I think there are skills for that in the HSCP. Certainly I have colleagues that are very skilled in that, but whether we do it systematically, I'm not as clear on that. And this goes to Alex's point 5 in her of the Scottish approach to service design in her slides. I think it's about getting the right tool and then knowing how to use it. So pre-COVID, we were planning to use this. I think that the term we had for this was to get a temperature, to get an idea of what the voice of Midlothian is. So Gemma had designed an installation where we would have a recording mic, which would be the center of this flower, and around the outside of the flower we'd have the petals and the leaves, and we'd ask people to record in the middle what keeps you well, what's the best thing about getting older, and then round the flowers and the petals we put in, you know, how do you keep well, and how can we support positive experience of aging. And then we'd get this really nice installation that would hopefully be eye-catching and allow us to gather more people, you know, to our cause after we got the first few. Unfortunately, that didn't work out as planned, and we had to redesign it, and came up with a folding card that we used with our partner, the British Red Cross, to hand out these cards. They were already handing out various things, some food parcels, some leaflets, some books from the library, and we put these cards together and used that partner to get this information to and from our patients or our citizens at an awkward time. We also had this question digitized and put online so people could respond. We got 25 responses from the cards and a further 8 responses online. So it wasn't as huge as it could be, but it did give us some response. And you know, you can see here from the word clouds, what's good about getting older is time and people and being with younger people as well. What keeps you well. This is colored a bit by COVID. Obviously, people haven't been able to get out during the last year. So it'd be interesting to know what effect COVID has had on this, but walking, family, being able to go and see people, and how can we support people to have a positive experience of getting old. Again, it's about connecting with people, having choice, having services that are relevant for people's ages. Some people, you know, have said, I don't like the older the service model that you have that just sort of treats us all the same. Could we have more things for older people that I actually like to do? So that's been interesting to hear. And there's a screenshot there of where some of those responses came back in, just to see. So and this is from the greeting cards. So this is how might we questions. Once we've got that information together and we start to look at it, we start to think about how might we, as a result of what we've discovered. So these were the questions that Gemma started to formulate. And then we went into in-depth interviews. So understanding people's experiences. And put this on just so you had some information. We had about 14 interviews. At the end of the day, we tried to get a sample that represented a good mix of who our partners, the British Red Cross and Vocal, who are our carers support agency, felt sort of represented, or who they could get hold of. So it wasn't just a totally random sample. And these were long conversations over 2 parts with citizens to find out much more information about them and their experience. So again, the same process of what keeps you well to begin with when these were written up, person at the center and themes that matter to them around the outside, and then a little summary, sort of a synopsis, if you like, of their story. And then this mapping the circle of care. So we're very keen to use, to point out that health and social care is only part of what keeps people well. Going back to that challenge of integrating all the different sectors that need to come together. So here you can see actually that what's important in the health and social care sector is a minority concern for this person. There are many, many other parts in the private sector, voluntary sector, and community sectors that actually contribute to keeping this person well. And that we really ought to bear in mind and be aware of and consider where the links are if we're to design a solution that's going to help us in our system of frailty care. So this slide here is just a condensed version. Again, it's another version of what our asset looked like at the end of the day. So we have our petals and our circle of care, and then around that circle of care on the second row here, there are little bits that came out, themes that went into some more detail to describe the specifics of the conversation, and then some ideas around, you know, what matters to somebody, what would they look for in the future, and did they mind the information sharing. Almost nobody said they had an issue with information sharing, provided it was for their benefit, basically. So then this slide is just for reference for you to see the questions that were asked, the research questions that were asked in the thematic interviews. And then we started to pull out what the themes that came out of those interviews. You know, what do people value, what are their experiences, and what are their barriers? As I guess we get into that process of triangulation, starting to pull all of that data that we've got together and trying to see what is it that we can start to learn and discern from our findings. And this then brought us to the engagement reflection sessions, where we had a number of engagement sessions here. You can see 10 listed. And there were questions. So this is a screenshot from a Miro board, where there were questions that were asked, and we were supposed to look at each of those citizen interviews and then start to observe things, make some comments, just get our, as clinicians, that is, you know, just get ourselves thinking, and then start to move into how might we type questions, which are these blue ones down here as well. So for each individual interview, we're really exploring it for what it seems to say to us, and then making sure that all of them get brought together and considered in the round. So this slide again then started to develop some key insights from the maps about personal resilience, asset-based approaches, the general approach that we're having in Midlothian around good conversations, the what matters to you, as the way in which we embed our citizen engagement from our services anyway. Things that are common across the place around access to GPs or problems, needing information to flow. All these themes were coming up. So, so this then helped us think about, you know, coming back to the point of the slide again, or the point of this first diamond, service mapping and bringing those findings together, public engagement, bringing those findings together, the in-depth interviews, and the engagement in reflection as well. We did that again through Padlet and Miro, where we ended up having key activities that we did, with then key questions and themes related to greetings cards, interviews and engagement, the thematic analysis of the workshop. These things started to come together, and we started to then theme them up. We could break these up on the screen, which was really helpful, and then we could start to come up with big themes along the top, and then reference in that data triangulation that I mentioned, where all of our exploration and discovery mapped back against the themes, so we could really say that we've sat in the data long enough and we understand it, and it's not just come out of our head. And the challenge that we've defined for ourselves at the end of the day is to really look at navigators, system navigators. It seems to be what people really value when it comes to interacting with our frailty system. Those people that are able to help them achieve something, and ideally empowered to do so. So I think what's been good about that is that I think we're in familiar territory. I think it feels like we're in the right place. And that's not a criticism in the sense that we haven't discovered something fantastical. It means we're doing our job, and we're aware of things. But what the nuance on that's been important is that we have a richer understanding of what we mean by that, and I think a different focus of enabling this person as a navigator, rather than providing a tool for that person to use. And I think that's a simple way of trying to sum it up for us going into the next phase of what we then might go on to develop. So very quickly, these slides at the end around our local aim of bringing these together. We wanted to create a resource and a space where we could bring some new opportunities in. We wanted to bring design thinking to the partnership. We wanted to strengthen our existing conversations and relationships within the partnership, and look for a model for technology to support service design, and to look at the potential for it to support us with digital transformation. So I think we're on a good journey at the moment, meeting those initial aims. There are some connections that the partnership that we've made across the partnership already. This project we've shared with our colleagues as we've gone along, and I think that supported public engagement, and our approach to it certainly opened up a bigger conversation about how we will engage and what we need to do going forwards. We've started to bring design thinking into the wider frailty program. We're just in the process of recommissioning our care at home services and the virtual engagement model. I didn't say, sorry, the interviews ended up having to be conducted via Teams. We did it on the telephone through Teams, the Skype interaction that's there, so that we could overcome the fact that we couldn't be there in person, but we didn't need a computer. We could call out, we could host a multi-person call. We had both the Red Cross or Vocal as our facilitator, and then our designer and the citizen. And that enabled us to record the conversation as well and get a transcript. And that was a useful way of sort of thinking about overcoming some of the problems for care at home. Alex mentioned third sector labs. And there are other benefits that we've started to see as a result of being involved in this project. In terms of benefits realization, we've created opportunities for digital development. We've got a good network that we're building. We're working more closely with our partners, and we're working well with the DHI, which I think can only be a good thing for us trying to scale this and grow in the future. And Midlothian is being recognized a bit more as somewhere where this kind of work can find a home. I think this slide is less relevant, but I think we want to continue to have the opportunity to share our knowledge. We want to think about reframing the way in which we work with our partners. There are other projects within our partnership that we can hopefully start to share this information into. And we now know that we need a little bit more help around our digital governance to make sure that we think about accountability, ownership, and resourcing of these projects going forwards. And I added this slide in as well. Alex has said it's not about the tech, and the reality of this is a quote I came up with at the beginning may not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I've ended up where I needed to be, and that very much describes how it feels falling down the rabbit hole. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That was impressive, and I'm impressed that we are right on time. So it's 3 o'clock CT time, 2 o'clock UK time. So as mentioned at the beginning, we'll just take a short break so that you can reflect on these 2 presentations, think about your questions. So we'll have 10 minutes. So it's 3 o'clock CT time. So we'll reconvene at 10 past 3. And as I was saying, please feel free to start chatting, putting your question in the chat, but we will be taking them verbally. So enjoy a short tea break, coffee break, and I will see you in 10 minutes. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, so are we getting back? You can see some faces. Mm-hmm. Great. So, as I was saying, now it's basically our opportunity to ask the question, potentially exchange the experience in either Slovenia or in the Basque Country. So take it as a mutual way of exchange. As we have 2 languages, I mean, we obviously have the simultaneous translations, but I will repeat the question in English so that the interpretation can pick up on that if it's not the question posed in English, obviously. So I'll open the floor. Is there anyone who would like to go first with the question or any observations potentially? Hopefully people are back.
Excuse me, Andrea. So yep. If I make a question in Spanish, it doesn't work, or?
No, you can ask the question in Spanish, and it will be translated. But I will also need to repeat the question for the Slovenian translation. If you follow me.
Ah, I see.
You will ask in Spanish, you will get it translated, and someone has to repeat the question in English so that the Slovenians can follow as well, because we can't, they won't have access to English channel, or other way around.
Okay, I will try with the translator help.
Okay, I see the first question, so I'll start, and then we can exchange via chat to fix it. So the first question is from Luisa. How do you select the citizens or patients?
That's a good question. The way we did it, as I mentioned on the slides before, was to look at a sort of purposive sample to a point, or a sort of representative sample, and to work closely with our partner organizations who know the people that we're wanting to reach. One of the things that came to us from the third sector feedback was, the citizens like you, but not as much as they like us. Which is absolutely fair, and I think goes to a legacy of social care and health getting involved with people's lives and trying to control, or the fear that somebody may go to a home if they ask for help. And the third sector are a care home, that is, and the third sector are a bit more friendly. So we used the British Red Cross, and we used Vocal, who we contract with to support carers in our local area, and actually they support the wider Lothian area, the regions around Edinburgh, and asked them, who do you know who might be good for us to talk to? And could you approach them and find out if they'd be interested? And can you make sure that we get a fairly good view of people that you see effectively? And that was a really good way for us to start this process. We're on a journey, as Alex said. We need to figure out these tools, and we need to figure out how we're going to do it going forwards. I mean, some of the thoughts around citizen panel, I know Scotland's just set one up, and exactly what that is and how you go. We have a citizens panel in Mid Lothian, I discovered during this process. We ask them some questions every year, but they weren't a group that we have been able to leverage for this. I'm not sure whether it's a useful group for us or whether we need to look at other models, but that's how we're doing it at the moment.
And if I can just add to that, just on behalf of, I suppose, some of the other programs, I think for me, how they've recruited people comes back to making sure that when you're planning for involving people, that you are thinking about how it's legal, how it's inclusive, and how it's ethical. And currently, I think we don't tend to take that time to really plan that properly. Who are we wanting to speak to? What questions are we wanted to ask? How is everybody safe in that instance? And so kind of with the Aberdeen work, I already kind of mentioned this, but they engaged with specialist services around domestic abuse, so that those specialist services could help them to determine people who were survivors of domestic abuse, who would be able and willing to share their experience and talk to them. But actually, what's also really, really important about that connection is that not only are they helping recruit, but they're there then to support the people if they're triggered by anything that gets discussed in the session, and they can also help you to identify how the best way to approach that conversation is, how we phrase the questions, what tools we use, because they're the people best placed to kind of to advise us on that. So so that was really, really helpful. Obviously, unfortunately, because of COVID, that didn't happen, but or happened to a smaller degree. But that link with the specialist services was really, really important for that kind of sensitive topic. And I know that the University of the Highlands and Islands and the Highland team connected with a number of respiratory kind of volunteer groups and charities as well to really help them identify people that could get involved in the way that they were doing their work too.
Great, thank you, Alex.
Just along with Andrea.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just go ahead. Along with that first question, I tried to make it in my broken English, but I tried to do it anyway. First of all, thank you, Alex and Matthew, for the awesome presentation. It was really, really very interesting. I think it gives a lot of information in order to keep on doing and keep on being confident with what we're doing in here in the Basque Country, trying to do it in some way or another. When you say to involve people from the beginning, I mean, the first step is, okay, to get some people in any kind of ways. But when you involve those people, participants from the beginning, do they go with you all along the process? I mean, because one is the beginning of the process, but the other way is how to co-design the process, the project, through the extension of the project. Do you work with them up to the end of the project or just in the beginning?
Do you want me to? Yeah. Thank you, Igor. Your broken English is far better than my appalling Spanish. So thank you, and you've nothing to apologise for. I appreciate the question. Yeah, that is something that we're going to have to take into the next diamond. So the 14 people that we identified for the big conversations, we're very much hoping that they will continue that journey with us and be somebody that we can go back to, or be a group that we can go back to as we start to think about ideas. And I'm speaking like I know what I'm talking about. Alex is going to train us in a couple of weeks, start that process of what the next diamond looks like. So, but we are hoping that we can go back to them, and that we might start to develop those other groups that I mentioned, or another way in which Midlothian can start to build that constant conversation with our population, with our citizens. And how that looks, I'll leave Alex to describe, because I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think kind of in terms of how the idea is that you would involve them throughout the process. I think any time that we've done work like this, where it's been, people have been involved from the beginning, people have really, really valued that continual kind of involvement, because we're able to go back and say, this is what we heard, this is where we're at now. And also in involving them, I think in things like sense making of what of the data as you have it, it helps them to see things not just from their point of view, but also from the wider needs of anyone that you've engaged with. And I think sometimes that's really needed at times, because often, so I don't know how you do things in the Basque Country, but in terms of kind of, sometimes when we run sessions and we invite people to come in, sometimes they've got something that they want to repeatedly talk about that maybe doesn't have anything to do with the reason why you're there, but they want to tell their story again. So there's something about how we support people to be meaningfully involved and kind of come back to them again and again, so that they can see that we've listened to what they've said, and we've also taken into consideration wider needs that that they can help us make sense of as well, so that they don't look at it and go, well, I told you that I needed an app and you've created a website, not an app. We've actually gone, well, here's the wider range of needs that have come through, help us figure out what an appropriate solution is. So that's kind of that it would be great to see that kind of happen. And I hope, yeah, Matthew, with your kind of the people that you've engaged with so far, they will still want to and be keen to kind of participate.
Great, thank you. I mean, I see a couple of questions, but actually just continuing maybe with that engagement and recruitment of citizens, there are selections. There is a similar questions from Sol, if you consider also socioeconomic status, and then a very similar question from Matea from Slovenia, if you actually make sure that you have vulnerable people included, because as she said, it's easy from the research methodological point of view, but much more difficult in practice. Yeah,
we did. I think I'd need to go and check the detail. This is the benefit of having, or the lack of benefit of having GEMA involved. So Scotland uses the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, the SIMD, and it breaks it down against certain socioeconomic criteria, and we have representation from 4 out of the 5 quintiles across the board within our interviews. And again, that goes back to trying to get a sort of representative sample. We didn't get everything that we wanted. We didn't get patients that were, quite as representative across an age range. We did try and get a new carer as well as somebody that had been caring for a while. So we did try and look at some of those questions and address them. But I guess what we tried to do was overtly address, like, make them overt and say we've thought about it and this is what we've been able to achieve. And I think we would hope to do more as we get practiced.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, as the Double Diamond and the process is iterative. It's not, so as you kind of go through, okay, you can reflect and go, well, I've not been able to reach this group, and this group, but how do I, when we come to ideation or other points on that journey, try and reach those people and bring them in as well. I know that kind of, obviously, I think both Midlothian and Highland went through kind of university ethics to get sign-off on the work they were doing. So they've kind of considered all of that within that kind of space. But also there was kind of discussion around, we have in Scotland kind of equality impact assessment forms. I don't know if you have something of the same kind of phrase or what, but it covers kind of the 9 protected characteristics and kind of encourages you to really think about, well, how do I involve them, why do I involve them, and what impact could I have on this group if I don't consider them in this work. So that is something that is considered. I think the thing to mention is that I'd say when we started off the programme, we awarded, or we kind of, the 4 Pathfinders were selected in April 2019. And there was probably a delay of about 2 or 3 months when it was about getting the money out the door and allowing teams to recruit people to support them to do or build partnerships to allow them to kind of start the work. So there was a slight delay there, and then obviously come March we have, which is actually where most people were about to really start their face-to-face engagement, as Matthew showed with the kind of the flower kind of flower board, and so a lot of them had to pivot and really kind of think about, okay, how can we reach people? And I think, inevitably, especially in March last year, there is that that immediate rush to be online, and then the kind of inequality that creates because we're all suddenly being online. But I think as the nation and as people working in health and social care, we're much more aware of those inequalities and how we can actually kind of reach people. I think through Matthew's work that he did as well, that understanding that people didn't want necessarily to have interviews on Teams, they wanted a phone call. So just even trying to find the ways that we can reach people that aren't going to completely block off people that maybe would be really, really useful to involve.
Apologies, I muted. So Mattia, did it answer for your questions, or do you have any kind of insights you would like to share from maybe your perspective?
This is so, well, I can't find, yeah, here. Sorry. Okay. I was just enjoying all of what you were saying. So, and in the meantime, trying to, because it's very, very interesting, really. And I'm from Flanders. And I was, well, there are many questions about the selections, of course. That's brilliant. And then I was also thinking that, Alex, you mentioned service designer. That it's more than a term. I got the impression. Are you thinking about giving it a kind of a function description over time? Because you said, okay, we cannot expect that every team has a service designer within its team. So it would be nice also to see what you think, who is or who can be a service designer. And then on more, in a broader way, when we were in Flanders, when we are applying, the maturity matrix assessment tool, and it occurred to me that although those people, they knew each other. They actually didn't know what they would. One was thinking about health and social care, and or the other person was thinking about it. So, but once you put them together, you see that they exchange, and they start understanding one another. And I was wondering, and that's maybe for you as well, Alex, but also for Matthew, if people start talking to each other in these groups, do they finally understand as well how to help each other? Maybe I think it's interesting. So you need to put the citizen up front. You need to work with the citizen, but the professional is also very much needed to help afterwards the citizen, or even to help or to understand why a certain technological solution is good and why it can help the persons.
My goodness, how long do you have? Like, talking about service design and the future of it is like my thing.
It's okay. I'm going to share your presentation with my colleagues in Flanders, so you may be sure you will receive other questions.
Come along to the service design community of practice. We run it quarterly, and we have it next. Hang on, let me get right. No, 2 weeks on Wednesday is our next one. So I will keep this brief. Service design, the interest in service design has exploded in the last couple of years. I think primarily in part because of GovUK and kind of the government digital service and the impact that's had on that kind of that website, but the delivery of digitally kind of delivering services such as like renewing your passport or things like that, and how they've made that really seamless. That's quite a clear-cut service that you can kind of do. Health and social care, and someone else kind of asked this as well, health and social care is a whole other kettle of fish, and that maybe doesn't make sense as well when you translate that idiom, but yes, it's a whole other thing that we have to explore, and because it is so complex. And I think in terms of service design, we do have so many really, really great skills, and I think we have so many people who have been doing service design, because you look at the double diamond, you look at kind of what we're saying to do, understand the problem before you design a solution, and it makes sense. So there will be people out there who will have been kind of doing this, and the number of times I have a conversation where people go, oh my goodness, like this is just so helpful to put a frame around what it is that I do, like, so I can now say this is how I work. And you can get real service design purists who think, well, you need a design degree, or you need this and that, and I don't agree with that. I think you need to take the time to really hone your craft. Like, if you want to take a design-led approach, really like embody those principles and do it to the best of your ability, but do it to where you can, good enough. There's the ideal scenario is that we'd start at the beginning of the double diamond. In reality, having worked in private sector, with public sector, and in public sector, we rarely get to start at the very beginning. There's so much that we can draw on and learn from and build on, and lots of different, and it requires a multidisciplinary team. So bring in your quality improvement people, bring in your kind of community engagement people, and it's about that kind of, what are the tools and how do we change the kind of the thinking to do that, and some of that I think actually comes down to our leaders a lot of the time, because it's about that pushback and go, okay, I know you want me to deliver this tomorrow, but here's the reasons why we actually need to just pause a moment and take a bit of time. And it doesn't have to be, this program is taken longer than we anticipated, definitely. And, if we were to run it again, we wouldn't want it to go on for this long. And there's lots of learning that means we would change things and tweak things to make it run much more smoothly. But I think, it's about recognizing and seeing the value in taking that time to understand the problem before we design a solution, and better understanding of our users. So we're trying to build up our service design profession. We're trying to better connect across our NHS organisations, local government organisations, Scottish Government, because we are small. There's not that many service design user researchers, content designers. How can we collaborate so that we can use, so that we can actually be of value. But a big part of that as well comes down to how do we support people who want to take this approach and don't consider themselves a service designer, to actually feel that they're confident enough to do some of it or all of it, or know where to go. So the community of practice is a big part of that. And we, on our second or third, this really started it during COVID. On our second session, someone actually left the feedback that this feels like a community already, which I think, was just a massive, massive win for me. That people felt confident, they felt encouraged to try this, and they felt that they could reach out to the space to get support if they needed it, or advice on how they're doing it. So yeah, that is my long-winded version that I've shortened, but if there's more, then please do ask. Matthew, have you got anything you want to add?
I was just thinking about the point around as you spend time with somebody, do the barriers break down to a point. So I think I'll come back to that in a moment, but there's more that we need to do with the citizens. Certainly where this process started, what I didn't frame at the beginning of my presentation was to say we were interested in how information moves around our system, really. I mean, Alex just had it on her slide, but I could have added that. So we had another government project that we were involved in where we had some facilitated workshops, 6 3-hour workshops to bring service providers together, so a range of people that are already involved, and to talk, what are the issues that mattered. It was about care leadership in one of our areas, one of our regions, and the two things that came out of that, one was too big to bite off for us, which is how do we make flexible dynamic care packages which scale with need, and the other one was how does information come out. So this is the one we took forwards. But the biggest other thing that came out of that workshop was just how much it made a difference to people when they put a face to a name, when they understood the pressure in different teams, when they got to be able to have that time together. It's human nature, isn't it? We like to be with people, we're social animals, but it made a huge difference. And I think returning to the point around citizen engagement, there's a concept called the participation ladder that I was introduced to during this work. And I think there's a challenge. It's certainly some conversations I've had with our public engagement leads around how do we start to meaningfully shift up that ladder. And that has to do with both meaningful relationships with people, within our cohort of people we're talking to, within maybe that citizens panel or whatever that tool or forum is that allows us to meaningfully engage, or how we bring those engagement feedbacks and opportunities together. But also then how power seeds. And I guess that connects to one of the other questions that's sitting in the chat around whether or not there's an imbalance between technical expertise and with citizens and health professionals. So I think we need to unpick how we enable with either knowledge as power, or resources as power, or some other mechanism of power, and have time with various stakeholders that we all need to work together.
Great, thank you. And I see there are 2 questions from Kajsa. So maybe Kajsa, do you want to step in and pose these questions yourself rather than me reading?
Okay. Hello. It was a very interesting presentation for me, and I would like to skip to the results, your results. And I'm interested in what kind of tools do you use to present the results, especially you shown the circle of care diagram and others. And this is a kind of methodology, or this is your idea and you decided to use it? Can you tell us something more about it?
I'll do my best. Thank you for the question. As I say, Gemma would be able to speak at length about this. It's something. So we benefit with the DHI. They're being with us because they have so many projects in this space, and through other projects and other ways into this, they found that being able to have a conversation with a citizen and I guess to try and illustrate or expose, the bits in that conversation that mattered was a useful tool. So to show somebody who's involved with their care, it came originally, I think, from something to do with MS, multiple sclerosis, and a backpack concept. I may be wrong in that, but the idea was that various people came into their house, and they didn't all know who they were. They maybe knew one person, and the rest of them was, oh, it's the nurse, it's the physio, it's the someone else. So there was this need to try and condense a lot of information and represent it visually. But also, I think, and we're coming on to this, and I haven't stepped into solutions yet, I think Gemma's intention for it is that it could be used as a user interface. So as we hope to have good conversations with somebody, what matters to you effectively, rather than, so I see you've been referred for your broken leg, let's get on with your exercises, shall we? But if we can get an understanding of somebody, and piece together what's important around that person at the center, we might, for example, and I'm reaching here, Alex will chide me, but it might be, for example, that we pull certain people in as a means of maybe sharing information with them. So it might become not just a visual representation of something that's otherwise quite complex and quite wordy. It might actually be a way in which we can say, well, we're talking to you about what matters, and you say the nurse matters and the physio matters, and maybe your third sector worker matters, and perhaps your brother who lives in Australia, for example. And all these people come onto a map, and we might then be able to use that to help us drive information sharing or consent models or something else. So I can report back on that at another point, but there's some ideas around how we're trying to formulate a lot of information at the moment and potentially make it useful.
And I think in terms of you've asked kind of the tools used for this circle of care. So, and I hope I'm answering your question, and I hope I'm doing Gemma justice in answering this question as well. So initially, kind of the circle of care was used in the workshop with the staff, with the system kind of staff, as Matthew kind of showed the picture, and you put the patient in the person in the middle, patient in the middle, and then you saw the system around that circle. But then what Gemma and the Red Cross did was they interviewed a small number of people with very in-depth interviews to really understand what that person's life is like, what keeps them well, what is good about aging, who's around them. And Gemma was able to then draw out that circle of care. I don't know if it comes from I don't know if it's a methodology or if it's something that DHI use, and I've put the link in the side there. But Gemma was able to kind of draw that out from part of the conversation with that person, and then went back to those people as well to say, here is your circle of care. Does this, have I captured this correctly? Is this how you see your care? And I think, Matthew, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure Gemma said that they had actually someone kind of looked at it and said, it's amazing to actually just see my care, my circle of care mapped out like this, because I don't have that picture in my head. I don't see all those different connections and all those different things that are in my life that make aging good for me. I think some of you might have seen there was I think it said hairdressers or things like that were sometimes put in the community section because that's something that matters to people. So there was feedback that actually even just visualizing that for those people was really, really beneficial for them. And I think what Matthew's talking about in terms of how they use that and take it forwards, especially because the focus for this work is going to be on navigators of that system. There's so much potential now that we can see that in a really clear visual. But if you've got any other kind of follow-up question, just let us know. And if we need to get Gemma to answer it, we can do that too.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have two more questions, and I'll start with this quite broad general question. Koldo, if you don't mind, just to step in as well yourself.
Thank you. I was thinking about, the comparison between, thinking about the service co-design, the comparison between the healthcare public sector and other public services. And in my view, there's quite a big difference between as Matthew mentioned, the imbalance between the technical, clinical expertise to solve the problem behind, and the let's say the experience of life of people that are living their lives and maybe are living with that disease and that problem. And for me, there's a clear imbalance between those two. And I think due to that imbalance, there's been a, well, as I expressed on the question, there's been a traditional paternalistic attitude from healthcare professionals towards citizens or public. And I was wondering if you, from your experience, if you are agree with that view, and if you see a difference, for example, when thinking about, I don't know, the housing services or some other social services from the public sector. Thank you.
This is a good question. I do agree, actually, with it. I think, yeah, I think health and social care, housing often too, are much closer to the patient, much closer to the citizen. They see them day in, day out, and so actually, the difference in feeling like they know the answers already is there. Like they feel they know that person, they feel they can speak on their behalf, and more often than not, if it is around, their job there is to problem solve, whether it's for health reasons or whatever. So there is that kind of that approach of, I know the answer here, we can solve this quickly, and it is different than other kind of services, government, local government as well, because those, again, there's that separation from actually engaging people and being that close to people often. In many ways makes it harder so service design and the Scottish approach to service design in local government, often they're quite afraid to speak to people, because if we speak with our citizens, they'll tell us things that we're doing badly, and then we have, I don't want that. I don't want to hear anything bad. So let's maybe not do that. Or we'll just get feedback once we've delivered it, and we'll do that instead. Let's not involve them throughout. And that's slightly flippant. There are really good people wanting to do this well, but there is a nervousness about it too. Whereas with health and social care and housing, because we're so much more, we're so used to that already with our public participation groups, with our community engagement teams, with the fact we've got doctors and care workers, and we already do that engagement already. So to kind of come in and talk about design and service design, more often than not, we kind of get, yeah, but we do that already. Or, oh, okay, how can I take some of this approach into how I do? So there's almost like they're more open to this as an approach, and see the value in it, whereas governments and local governments and those are a bit more scared by it, I think, and possibly less interested in upskilling themselves, whereas you have the people working on the ground in health and social care who want to build these skills so that they can do the work better, they can improve things in their kind of service in a better way. But Matthew, I know obviously you're in the partnership. I don't know what your kind of opinion is, and obviously you've got a background as well. So
yeah, I was just thinking. I think I'm sort of paraphrasing some of the points I made before. I guess there is a historical culture of paternalism, in NHS or care services. I think patients have that name for a reason. Their weight, they have it, and they're inclined to wait. I think there is a strong move against that. Whether it's there at the coalface, I don't know. I remember when I was training to be an allied health professional, to be a physio, we were told, you're the ones with the time to talk to the patient. You can sit there and you can have that conversation with them and find out what they want. But life's busy, even to people that have more time to work with people. I think in terms of things that we're doing to address that paternalism in our approach, which maybe helps to shift the culture, there are things like Teach Back in the way that we approach, and I think the Institute for Healthcare or Health Improvement has some good resources on that. Don, I've forgotten his last name, but the American professor and clinician heads that up. But rather than blustering in and giving the information, just working with somebody and making sure they've understood. So we've addressed that point around health literacy and participation. The point that I mentioned about the what matters to me, and to explain that just a bit further, that's more of a sort of an assets, what we would call, it's still jargon, I'm afraid, but it's more of an assets-based approach to interviewing. So, you know, what's good at the moment, and what can we build on, you know, or what matters to you, and a specific example of, you know, the approach, you know, in a very well, if you're dealing with somebody with a weight problem, you know, telling them not to eat, for example, you know, or watch what they eat is not particularly helpful, as someone's explained it to me when they were trying to explain it before. But asking them, you know, what their drivers for why are they eating, or, you know, why are they, or what is it that takes them down that aisle in the supermarket, you know, the stress in their life, the fact that it's the only thing that gets them through on a Friday afternoon, the fact that there are other things that are going on, and then dealing with that, which is perhaps not what you turned up to do, you know, then puts you more in service of the person, and addressing the need ultimately that they have and what you're there to do, but by helping them change the circumstances that they're in. So I think that, you know, if we could take that model into our co-design work, as well as, you know, we go with a set of problems we have in our business, but there are a set of issues that our citizens have that we also need to sort of match up.
Okay, thank you. We now have another question around PDSA cycles. So, Jon, do you want to step in?
Was that how many is enough?
Yeah, that was how many are the minimum necessary to be successful in this type of interventions in average.
I'm definitely going to pass that one to Alex to see if there is even an answer. Sorry.
There isn't. I think the thing that I would want to explain about that is, and I think it comes down to what you. So I talk about prototyping, and I talk about prototyping being iterative, and for me, it kind of comes, you're starting off, you have an idea, you create that idea and you create it in a tactile way. So it doesn't cost you much money or take you much time, but you make that idea come to life, and then you get feedback on that. So for me, that would be a type of PDSA, because you then can build on that and understand, well, what more do I need to have in this idea, or what more do I need to consider to deliver this. And I think, you know, and then you do another, it's iterative the whole way through, until you get to your kind of looks like, feels like, can run it in situ, kind of actually test it with people and get the data for it in real life. But I think one of the challenges that I see often a lot is that, especially with improvement, is that we identify the improvement, and then we literally make the change in real life and then test that. And for me, obviously there'll be some instances where that's not dangerous, but actually for a service user experience, if you make a change, that can be quite unsettling potentially, and it could be dangerous. Hopefully it wouldn't be, but if you can come up with your idea and prototype it in ways that allow you to get feedback about what works, what doesn't, what needs to be better, you know, identify connections or other people that you've not thought of, what else needs to happen behind the scenes in processes and things you haven't considered. If you continue to do that until you're ready to kind of develop it and deliver it in situ, then that's better for everyone involved. How long that takes, I think, will depend. We're not saying that everybody has to build a digital solution from scratch. We're not saying that you have to deliver one solution, because we're looking at potentially whole system. You could have identified lots of different ideas or areas where solutions could be helpful, not necessarily a digital solution, but just any solution. And if it's quite a clear solution, that might be a fewer number of PDSAs. If it's quite complex, it might take much more iteration to really feel confident that you can deliver that and deliver it well. So yeah, the answer, I don't really have one. I think it depends on what the solution is that they come up with, that they want to then deliver. But I think one of the things that we did say when people were doing user research in the first diamond is you will start to identify themes coming through, and it's when you kind of reach that saturation point from what you're hearing from people is when you probably can kind of move on to the next bit. And it's the same for kind of your designs, your solutions. As you know, when you kind of start hearing the same the same kind of inputs, the same insights from people, you know that you've got something that you can change, and you can then change that and do another version of the test. I think I said to you, Matthew, at the start, like it's you know, you actually don't need a massive number of people to tell you if something isn't quite right with your idea. I've never found the source, and so I really need to find it. But it's honestly, it's as few as something like 6 people, especially if you're talking about digital. If you design something digital and something isn't quite right with it, or there's a blocker in that product, it will take a minimum, like probably about 6 people to tell you that something is wrong here and you need to change that. So it's not that you need to come up with an idea and go to hundreds and hundreds of people. It's actually like just taking kind of you know, have a focus group, get some feedback on that, and then iterate it and do it again.
Okay, great. We have another question in the chat, which I'll just read out from Luisa Martinez. Have you had any difficulty understanding between participants' expectations? For example, if members of patient associations of specific pathologies and the real resources and standards of the system?
Thank you, Luisa. I think we're in a fortunate position at the moment in that first diamond of not having to deal with that yet, and that's part of that falling down the rabbit hole point that I put. That sort of, we'd normally approach it with a series of how are we going to solve the problem and how will we deal with, you know, what we find. At the moment, I think we've been in a situation where we've just had to go and discover, or we've been directed to go and discover and learn and see what's there. And we haven't had to match that against real expectation yet, partly because we're not promising anything. We're just trying to understand what it is. And that's the difference between patient engagement that we've had before and this process of discovery, if we were to, you know, split hairs over what we mean. So I think as we go into this next phase, which was going to feel more familiar, trying to understand then with our ideation sessions, what people are asking for compared to what we can then start to build, I think will shape the product or products that we come up with. But right now, we just needed to go and discover what's out there.
Definitely, and I think that for me, kind of the participant expectations. It's, you know, that's why you involve them in the process, because then they see and you're able to really kind of get their input into why something will work or won't work for the person. But obviously, as like Matthew is saying, kind of in the background as well, like you have to, it's why I always refer back to that quote, you know, it's needs of the people, needs of the people, requirements of the business, and the opportunities of technology as well. We have to make sure that it's meeting, it's desirable, it's feasible, it's viable, but we have to start with understanding the problem that it's going to solve, first of all.
Great, thank you.
But to pick up on your point that you've then put in the phrase again, so Alex said that there are some game rules there in the approach to the service design. I guess part of this issue with the transformation is that we are supposed to think big, which is probably why we haven't then approached it with this is the confine that we're working in. We're supposed to do something that is pushing the limit of health and social care in a transformative way, you know, that point that I made around the initial aim. So although we're not going to suddenly turn around and say that everyone's going to have a personal nurse 24/7, I mean, that would be out of order, I suppose. The concept of, you know, shifting a model where we say, actually, we really, really need to promote and explore patient-owned records, you know, data, and what that means. And that's the area that we're going to need to promote. Now, that's not in the gift of the HSCP to progress on its own. That's very much something that we'd be, you know, within the Scottish Health and Social Care or the health and social care strategy and agenda there. But we would then look to progress that through. So I guess there's different levels within which we've got our barriers. There's things that we can't change within resourcing, but we might then make a business case for as we've gone in for discovery to say, this is going to help us. And yes, we will have to invest here, and we'll have to then expect the reward later on, and how that, you know, payer and beneficiary, you know, relationship works out as we're shifting models of care. But then also have to, hopefully through Alex and her team at the national group, push up and say, well, this is what we need. You know, can we be a beacon site for developing this area? And if there's funding and opportunity to do that, then we can maybe start another work stream.
Great, excellent. So looking at the time, we still have 4 minutes to go. So is there any last minute question before we close?
Just one last one.
Yeah, good.
Andrea, if you allow me.
Yeah, sure.
Just according with your experience, what 3 things you keep doing in order to start the project again, and what other 3 things you shouldn't go along in order to 3 good ones, 3 good learnings, and 3 good not so good learnings in your experience? That's all. Thank you.
It's going to take me 4 minutes to think of an answer. My goodness. I think I would go. So if we were doing this again, things I would do differently. I would probably, things I would do differently. I would, now we have more service designers within health and social care. I would bring more of them in from the very beginning to be kind of a buddy with each of the 4 pathfinders, so that they have that contact and connection from the beginning. That wasn't possible 2 years ago, so I would do that. I think there is also something about, I have noticed certain points where I can really bring value to the teams, and because they're all doing it differently, it's it's different for each team. But for instance, I can bring value in helping them sense make the data that they've gathered, so that they see the whole picture, in the same way that Gemma has done that in partnership with with Midlothian. And I think the third thing I would do is I would get them to talk about this more and earlier on. I think it's quite funny when we have our webinar sessions, people are still very quiet when we finish. We've got someone in to present, and then they're very quiet and they're not asking questions. And I don't know, there's something that I need to explore about how I support people to be more engaged in that space. Matthew is normally one of the more vocal people on that call. So yeah, there's something there that I'm not quite getting right. 3 things I would do again. I like the fact that we have 4 very different focuses. It makes it harder, but I like that. I think it's really, really interesting, and interesting to see the similar learning about the approach they're taking. I would keep, can I just keep the 4 teams? Just keep the 4 teams we have now and just do it all again, because actually it's been a lot of fun and I've really enjoyed learning with them. And what's my other thing? I would keep, we've switched the way that we've delivered it because of COVID. We're doing the different sessions with the individual teams, and I would keep that. I think we were ambitious in thinking we could bring everybody together every 6 months and do the next, do discover, do define, do develop, and do deliver. I think what we learned quite early on is that people are in such different places on their journey that wasn't really possible, and actually it really helps to have that focused time. So, you know, I'll be delivering the develop sessions for Midlothian at the end of this month, and I'm able to build on where they're at and what they're doing to make sure that what I deliver hopefully meets the need that they have for where they're going. So I'd keep that as well. Matthew, I'm sorry, but I've maybe given you time to think, but you've got like
I really appreciate that. You have, yeah. I don't know that they're amazing as an answer, but thank you for the question. It's prompted me to think. So 3 things I'd stop. So go with the negative first. I think worrying about, Alex used the phrase trust the process. I think there's a point where worrying about whether we're doing the right thing, or feeling that maybe you've ceded some control somewhere, you know, and just let that go. I think my third point would be, don't do it in a pandemic. Stop doing it in a pandemic. It's much easier when you're not doing it. But related to that is to shrink the time down a little bit. It's been really helpful, pandemic aside, it's been really helpful to have the time, but it has been quite a luxury. And I think for the organization to absorb it, having a year to spend in that first diamond before COVID got in the way is quite a long time to understand how to plan and do that. Things I'd like to keep, I think, trust the process, as I said, and get help. I think we've learned a lot from the DHI, but I think they bring a lot to the organization to bring that experience in while we're still learning. I think trust my instincts and my role is one of the other things around that sort of control and worry is what is your role as a project manager when someone else is coming in as a service design expert and you're trying to bring these things together, and you know the business and you know what your organization's trying to achieve, and then you have to match that with what someone else is bringing in from their perspective as well. And that's been an important lesson. And I think chiefly take time with the data. We nearly, because we were pushed towards the end as COVID was coming in, ran the risk of trying to do something too quickly. We were given an extra 3 months to really go into detail, and that was such a valuable opportunity. So I'd recommend taking time with your data.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Alex. I know that we are 2 minutes over time, but I just would like to give, if you don't mind, a final comment to our colleague Mattia on behalf of Slovenian colleagues, just to kind of have the final comment, and then we will close the session. Mattia, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, both of you, Matthew and Alex. It was very interesting, but I know we are running out of time, so I would just like to ask you what you would recommend to a local community to encourage to start something similar, similar projects, co-creating system solutions with citizens. So just one key message or recommendation. Thank you.
Do you want to go first, Matthew, or do you want time to think?
Well, the challenge I've got in answering that question is what really unlocked it for us was the fact that there was funding and a project. I don't think, being honest, that Midlothian would have had the resources or the opportunity. So from that point of view, I suppose a rather glib and unhelpful answer is to try and create the resource and that opportunity to then promote an idea with, but it doesn't really help you, I don't think. So I'm sorry about that.
Mine, I think, is ask why. Like, I think the biggest kind of bit of advice I gave people at the start was like, ask why questions. So when someone comes to you and says, this is the idea we need to go with, ask why. When they give you the next answer, ask why again. Like, one of the kind of really simple service design methods that probably some of you will know from other spaces anyway is kind of the 5 whys. Ask why 5 times to really uncover the problem at the root of that. And actually you might find that if you really challenge someone before they jump to that solution and jump to delivering that, then actually you've got a piece of work to really understand the intricacies of something before you really kind of come up with a solution. So it might just help you to pause. And I think also the other thing I would say is, before you go out to involve people, reflect on what you know from everything that's happened before, because you're never starting from a blank canvas, so that you can identify kind of the gaps in your knowledge to be asking those questions of them. There is such a thing as a stupid question. I know people like to say there isn't such a thing as a stupid question, but when it comes to patient and public time and their input, there is such a thing. We have to really think, why are we involving them, and how do we do so in a meaningful way that is safe? So how to be legal, inclusive, ethical, and how to ask the right questions, and how to pause and just ask why of your own kind of stuff are probably I suppose would be my advice.
Thank you very much, Alex. So we'll definitely pause it here. As I was saying, there will be opportunity to follow up on this session. So I would all like to kind of like reflect on these sessions, think about if there are particular aspects which you would like to explore further. We would be very happy to schedule follow-up sessions on that. As I was saying, we will record the presentation, the whole workshop, so I'll let you know once this is available. So we will share it through our Twitter account and on the project website, and we will also do some proper write-up on of this session. So I would like to thank you so much to our speakers, to Alex and Matthew, for your great involvement, and also all participants for your time, questions, and interactions. And I hope to see you again, and yeah, we will just kind of like hopefully take some concrete work forward, or some topics for collaboration further. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.